You can lose 20 pounds and still have a belly. It is one of the most frustrating and confusing realities of getting older. You are eating well. You are exercising. The scale is moving in the right direction, but that stubborn pouch of fat around your midsection refuses to budge. And here is the part that most people do not realize, that almost nobody ever tells you. It is not because you are doing something wrong. It is because after the age of 50, the entire metabolic game changes. The strategies that worked in your 30s and 40s become not just ineffective, but in some cases actively counterproductive, making the problem worse instead of better. In this video, we are going to uncover the number one cause of belly fat after 50, which is almost certainly not what you think it is. And I'm going to give you a clear 21-day plan that targets the actual root cause instead of just the symptoms. To understand why belly fat accumulates after 50, we have to start with what is happening inside your body at the hormonal level. And I want to be very direct about something up front. This is not about willpower. This is not about being lazy or undisciplined. This is straightforward biology that most people are never taught. As we age, several critical hormonal shifts take place that fundamentally change where and how your body stores fat. In men, testosterone begins to decline by about 1 to 2% per year after the age of 30. By the time a man reaches his 50s, his testosterone levels may be 30 to 40% lower than they were in his 20s. In women, the drop in estrogen during menopause is even more dramatic, with levels falling by as much as 80% over just a few years. Both of these hormones play a direct role in regulating where your body deposits fat. When they decline, fat storage shifts away from the hips, thighs, and arms and toward the abdomen. But that is only half the picture. The bigger factor, and the one that most people never hear about because it does not sell diet books or fitness programs, is how aging affects your body's ability to process the sugar in your bloodstream. As you get older, your cells become less responsive to a hormone called insulin, which is the signal that tells your cells to absorb glucose from your blood. This is called insulin resistance, and it is the single most important metabolic driver of belly fat after 50. Here is why it matters so much. When your cells stop responding to insulin properly, your body has to produce more and more of it to get the same job done. Chronically high insulin levels tell your body to store incoming energy as fat, specifically as visceral fat, the deep belly fat that wraps around your liver, pancreas, and intestines. And here's where it gets truly problematic. Unlike the subcutaneous fat just under your skin, visceral fat is metabolically active. It is not just sitting there passively. It is actively releasing inflammatory signaling molecules called cytokines that make your insulin resistance even worse. It creates a vicious cycle that the standard advice to simply eat less and move more completely fails to address. So what is the number one cause of belly fat after 50? The answer is not what the diet industry wants you to believe. It is not calories. It is not carbohydrates. It is not a lack of exercise, at least not the kind of exercise most people are doing. The number one cause is the synergistic combination of declining muscle mass and rising insulin resistance, driven by age-related hormonal changes, that creates a metabolic environment where your body actively prefers to store fat around your abdomen. And the trouble is that the very strategies most commonly prescribed for weight loss, chronic steady-state cardio, and severe calorie restriction can actually accelerate this process after 50. Let me explain why, because this is the key insight that changes everything. When you drastically cut calories, especially below 1,200 calories a day, your body perceives it as a threat to survival. It responds by releasing cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Cortisol has a very specific effect on fat distribution. It promotes the deposition of fat in the abdomen and breaks down muscle tissue for energy. This loss of muscle matters enormously because muscle is your body's primary glucose disposal system. It is the main tissue that pulls sugar out of your bloodstream in response to insulin. So when you lose muscle from severe calorie restriction, your body's ability to handle carbohydrates diminishes. Your blood sugar stays higher after meals. Your insulin levels rise to compensate, and you end up storing more belly fat even as the number on the scale goes down. This is the metabolic trap that so many people over 50 find themselves in. They follow the conventional advice, lose weight on the scale, but end up with a higher percentage of body fat and less muscle than when they started. The same problem applies to long-duration, steady-state cardio. Jogging for 45 minutes several times a week can raise cortisol and strip away muscle tissue if you are not doing the right type of strength training to preserve it. The standard playbook is working against people over 50, and that is why you can do everything right and still end up with a belly that will not go away. Now let us talk about how to actually fix this. And I want to be realistic with you. A 21-day plan is not going to give you a completely flat stomach or a visible six-pack. Those take months or years of consistent work depending on where you are starting from. What a well-designed 21-day plan can do is break the cycle. It will reset the hormonal environment that is driving belly fat storage and put you on a clear trajectory where the fat starts coming off progressively and stays off long-term. Let me walk you through exactly what that looks like. Days 1 through 7 are about stabilizing your blood sugar. This is the foundation that everything else builds on, and it is the single highest leverage intervention you can make. The goal of this first week is not to restrict calories. It is to flatten the blood sugar spikes that are driving the insulin response and the fat storage cycle. The single most effective strategy for doing this is changing the order in which you eat your food at each meal. Multiple randomized controlled trials have demonstrated that when you eat fiber and protein before carbohydrates, the resulting blood sugar spike is significantly reduced. One study published in the journal Nutrients found that this simple change in meal sequencing lowered post-meal blood sugar spikes by nearly 40% in participants with insulin resistance. The mechanism is straightforward. Fiber and protein slow down the rate at which your stomach empties into your small intestine, which reduces the speed at which carbohydrates are digested and absorbed. So for every meal, eat your vegetables first, then your protein, then your starches and sugars last. It sounds almost too simple to be effective, but the strength of the data behind this is very solid. The second strategy for this first week is to include a tablespoon of vinegar diluted in water before your largest meal of the day. A meta-analysis from the Journal of Diabetes Research analyzed 14 clinical trials and found that vinegar consumption before meals reduced blood sugar spikes by an average of 34%. The acetic acid in the vinegar inhibits the activity of certain starch-digesting enzymes, which means the carbohydrates you eat are broken down and absorbed more gradually. It also appears to improve the sensitivity of your muscle cells to insulin in the short term. I am talking about plain white vinegar or raw apple cider vinegar diluted in water, not vinegar-based salad dressings which often contain added sugar. Dilute 1 tablespoon in at least 8 ounces of water and drink it just before you start eating. Do not drink it undiluted as it can damage tooth enamel and irritate your esophagus. The third strategy is a 10-minute walk after your largest meal of the day. Walking activates the large muscles in your legs, which pull glucose out of your bloodstream through a mechanism that does not require insulin at all. This is called contraction-mediated glucose uptake, and it is one of the most effective ways to lower post-meal blood sugar without increasing your insulin levels. A study in the journal Diabetes Care found that a brief post-meal walk of just 10 to 15 minutes lowered blood sugar spikes in older adults by up to 37% compared to remaining seated. So for the first 7 days, 3 changes. Change your meal order so that vegetables and protein come before starches. Have a tablespoon of vinegar and water before your largest meal. Walk for 10 minutes after that meal. If you do nothing else for the entire first week, these 3 interventions alone will begin to reset your metabolic environment. Days 8 through 14 are about rebuilding your hormonal foundation through strength training and targeted sleep optimization. This is the phase where you create the long-term metabolic machinery that will keep belly fat off permanently. Most belly fat programs get this completely backward. They focus exclusively on burning calories through cardiovascular exercise. But the real leverage point for people over 50 is building and preserving metabolically active muscle tissue. Muscle is the body's primary glucose disposal system. The more muscle mass you carry, the more dietary sugar your body can clear from your bloodstream without needing to produce excess insulin. Each pound of muscle burns roughly 6 to 10 calories per day just to maintain itself, even when you are completely at rest. More importantly, muscle tissue is the main location where insulin does its work of moving glucose out of the blood and into cells. So when you increase your muscle mass, you increase your body's capacity to handle carbohydrates without triggering a large insulin response. The most effective way to build muscle after 50 is through progressive resistance training. A study published in the journal Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise followed older adults through a 12-week progressive resistance training program and found that their resting metabolic rate increased by nearly 7%. That means they were burning more calories at rest, not just during their workouts, and their insulin sensitivity improved as well. Here's the good news. You do not need to spend hours in the gym. 2 resistance training sessions per week, each lasting 30 to 40 minutes, is enough to produce significant and measurable changes in your metabolic health. Focus on compound movements that recruit multiple large muscle groups simultaneously. Squats, push-ups, seated rows, and overhead presses. These exercises stimulate the largest hormonal response and engage the most muscle tissue per minute of work. If you are new to resistance training, start with bodyweight versions of these exercises or very light weights and focus on proper form. The second piece of this phase is sleep. And I want to emphasize this because it is the most underrated factor in hormonal health after 50. When you do not get enough quality deep sleep, your cortisol levels rise the following day, and your insulin sensitivity drops measurably. A landmark study from the University of Chicago found that just 4 nights of partial sleep restriction, sleeping about 4.5 hours per night, reduced insulin sensitivity by nearly 25% in healthy young adults. For older adults, the impact is likely even more significant because baseline sleep quality tends to decline with age. For people over 50, the challenge is often not just getting enough hours of sleep on paper, but getting enough restorative deep sleep. The sleep stages where the most metabolic repair and hormone regulation happen are the deep sleep stages. And these are the stages that become shorter and less frequent as we age. One practical strategy that has good evidence behind it is keeping your bedroom cool, between 65 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. A cooler room helps your body maintain the temperature drop that is necessary for deep sleep initiation. The second strategy is to avoid eating any food within at least 3 hours of your bedtime. When your digestive system is actively working through a meal during the night, it raises your core body temperature and interferes with the onset of deep sleep. Your body is designed to rest at night, not to digest food. Days 15 through 21 are about directly managing the cortisol piece of this puzzle. And this is the part that almost nobody talks about, which is a shame because it may be the most important factor for people over 50. Chronic stress is one of the most powerful and under-recognized drivers of visceral fat accumulation in older adults. And most stress management advice is far too vague to be practically useful. Telling someone to just relax or reduce their stress is about as helpful as telling them to just lose weight. So let me give you 2 concrete, evidence-based strategies. The first is a breathing technique called coherent breathing. It involves breathing at a rate of 5 complete breaths per minute with a 5-second inhale followed by a 5-second exhale. That is 4 seconds slower than the average resting breathing rate of around 12 to 16 breaths per minute. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism examined the effects of coherent breathing on cortisol levels and found that just 15 minutes of this practice per day significantly reduced salivary cortisol compared to a control group that sat quietly. The mechanism is straightforward. Slow breathing at this specific rate activates the vagus nerve, which is the primary nerve of your parasympathetic nervous system. This is your rest and digest system, the biological counterbalance to your fight or flight stress response. When your vagus nerve is activated, your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, and your adrenal glands reduce their production of cortisol. The second strategy for this phase is to identify what I call your cortisol triggers. These are the specific daily patterns that you know raise your stress levels, even if you have normalized them. Checking your email first thing in the morning, watching the news before bed, multitasking during meals, scrolling through social media during a break. The goal is not to eliminate all stress from your life. which is neither realistic nor desirable. A certain amount of stress is necessary for motivation and growth. The goal is to identify the three most predictable cortisol triggers in your daily routine and replace them with lower stress alternatives. For most people over 50, checking their phone immediately upon waking is one of the most significant cortisol triggers they have never considered. When you flood your brain with notifications, emails, and news headlines within the first few minutes of being awake, your sympathetic nervous system activates immediately, and your cortisol spikes for the rest of the day. The research on this is consistent. The first hour after waking is a critical window for setting your hormonal tone for the entire day. If you start that window in a reactive, stress state, your cortisol remains elevated and your insulin sensitivity remains suppressed for hours afterward. Replacing that habit with just 10 minutes of quiet sitting, gentle stretching, or a short walk before you look at your phone can have a measurable impact on your cortisol levels by mid-afternoon. Now here's the counterintuitive piece that I want you to remember every time someone tells you to just eat less and exercise more. The most common advice for losing belly fat is actively wrong for people over 50. The standard prescription of calorie restriction and long cardio sessions makes the problem worse at the biological level. Severe calorie restriction raises cortisol, which tells your body to store visceral fat and break down muscle tissue. Long steady-state cardio sessions do the same thing. The real solution is almost the opposite of what the diet and fitness industry has been selling for decades. Eat enough protein to preserve your muscle tissue. Lift weights twice per week to build muscle. Control your blood sugar through strategic meal sequencing and post-meal walking. And manage your chronic stress levels through coherent breathing and eliminating your most predictable cortisol triggers. These four interventions target the actual root cause of belly fat after 50, which is the hormonal environment that determines where your body stores fat, how much muscle it maintains, and how efficiently it processes sugar. Let me consolidate the full 21-day plan into a clear summary that you can implement immediately. Week 1, days 1 through 7, is about stabilizing your blood sugar. Eat your vegetables and protein before your starches at every meal. Take 1 tablespoon of vinegar diluted in water before your largest meal of the day. Walk for 10 minutes after that meal. These 3 changes alone will begin to flatten the insulin spikes that drive belly fat storage. Week 2, days 8 through 14, is about building your metabolic engine. Perform 2 30 to 40-minute resistance training sessions focusing on compound movements. Prioritize 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep with a bedroom temperature between 65 and 68 degrees and no food within 3 hours of bedtime. Week 3, days 15 through 21, is about managing cortisol. Practice 5 minutes of coherent breathing at 5 breaths per minute, twice per day. Identify your 3 biggest cortisol triggers from your daily routine and replace them with lower stress alternatives, starting with not checking your phone first thing in the morning. That is the entire protocol. It is not complicated. It does not require expensive supplements, extreme diets, or expensive gym memberships. It just requires doing the right things consistently for 21 days to break the cycle. By the end of those 3 weeks, your blood sugar will be noticeably steadier throughout the day. Your energy levels will be more stable without the afternoon crashes, and your body will have begun the shift from a fat-storing hormonal environment to a fat-burning one. That belly fat did not appear overnight, and it will not disappear overnight. But after 21 days of this protocol, you will have broken the metabolic cycle that has been keeping it there, and you will have established the foundation for sustainable long-term change. If this video gave you a new understanding of why that stubborn belly fat has been so difficult to lose, I would like to hear which part of the protocol you plan to start with. And if you found it useful, consider subscribing. I cover the latest research on health, longevity, and metabolic science for people over 50. Stay consistent